Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Penguin Season 1, Episode 1. It's called After Hours. I guess I'll start spoiler-free since it is the first episode. This is a show that's set in the same universe as The Batman, the movie that came out a couple of years ago, directed by Matt Reeves, and it has Colin Farrell reprising his role as the Penguin as, I was about to say Oswald Cobblepot, because I'm a fan of the comics, and that's what his name usually is. Oz Cobb is the name that he's actually got going in this series for whatever reason. They thought it sounded cooler or more realistic or something. He was very memorable in the movie, right? He was kind of a chameleon. No one could really tell it was Colin Farrell. You couldn't see visually it was him. You couldn't really hear his voice. He's in the makeup. He's doing the accent. He's doing the performance, and he completely just blends into it. So they announced, of course, that they were going to do this Penguin show at HBO Max, or whatever it's called now. I don't know. Worth mentioning, so this episode aired or went out on Thursday, but it's actually going to be on Sundays from episode 2 onwards, but not this Sunday. So it was Thursday this week, but then next week it'll be Sunday, and then it'll be Sunday going forward from there, which is just a little bit annoying and confusing. I don't know why it wasn't just Sunday this week as well. Maybe there's a reason for it, I don't know. But regardless, was very curious about this. It's interesting that Penguin's a character who's going to get this treatment, this, 8-episode, at least I think it's 8 episodes, kind of deluxe, in-between movie story about him presumably trying to take over the criminal underworld of Gotham in the aftermath of the Batman. And given we're not getting a sequel to that movie until, I think, 2026 now, it got delayed, this might, satiate the appetites of people who really liked it. Which, for the record, I did really like that movie. It wasn't necessarily as good as, say, The Dark Knight, but it was a very solid, different take on Batman, and as someone who reads the comics and is used to how things feel different when a new creative team takes over, a new writer and artist start a new run, that's kind of what it felt like to me when Matt Reeves came in and took over the character and did his take on them. We'll just ignore the Zack Snyder stuff in between because I don't want to think about it. So yeah, this is set after the movie, pretty quickly after the movie, even at that. I think it's been a week since the movie ended when the show starts off. The first episode does a decent job of recapping things. It kind of opens with like news reports of what's going on in the city, the events that happened at the end of that film, and there's a power vacuum in Gotham, and it's this really ominous shot going towards the Penguin from the back as he's looking over the city. It kind of is a really good opening sequence, one, because it fills you in a lot of information that's important to know for understanding the show in the context of where we are after the previous movie, but it's also very good at just being kind of a mission statement of like this simple shot of this man looking out over the city that he clearly wants to take. He clearly wants to take over the city and be the kingpin of Gotham. And that's kind of what this opening shot is like telling us visually, even though the words aren't really stated outright, but you get like senses of it throughout. What's so interesting for me coming to this is that obviously Penguin was very memorable in the movie, and it just so happens that there was a comic book series called The Penguin that just wrapped up by writer Tom King, which was very good. And that was actually about the Penguin coming back to Gotham City to retake it after being kind of living a normal life for a while in Metropolis. He comes back. He's kind of forced to, but he gets vicious, and he has this really imposing kind of vibe, because the Penguin has a lot of interpretations. Sometimes he's a goofy character, sometimes he's a bit more rough, sometimes they're going for this, which is a bit more kind of gritty and serious. But this idea that he's this guy that people think of as a joke that rises up and like uses that to like fuel his motivation to prove himself and become the person in charge, it really feels like that's where this show is going. So did I like the first episode? I did like the first episode. I thought this was pretty good by and large. I might slightly critique that it has to be over an hour long. This is something that HBO and Max shows seem to have specifically, where they often feel like, oh, we're not a prestige TV show unless we're over that 60-minute mark. And I'm like, it's okay if you're only 50 minutes. Like, it's fine. It's okay. But I do think it did a good job of just sort of like feeling like a really nice condensed story for this first episode. That it did like a nice little swerve at the start where I felt like it was setting up a very prominent main character, only to kind of to surprise me in how it handled things, and it kind of takes away a character early on that I thought was going to be a main character but isn't, and then that kind of propels what the story is for the episode. And watching this version of Penguin go around and kind of like handle who he works for, because he works for the Falcone. Well, I always say Falcone. That's how I've always pronounced it. So it's actually kind of. I remember this from the movie as well. Them saying Falcone over and over again, and it's just not how I say it. I'm going to have to try and say it because that's what they say in this show. But if I alternate between them, just bear with me. But him like dealing with his bosses who work in that crime family, but clearly he's got aspirations to be something more. Him being this kind of dangerous wild card, he's very captivating. If I was to sort of like sum up the main thing that makes this appealing, is actually just how good Colin Farrell is in the role. And not just because it's a good performance in a broad sense where, oh, he's really, he's really he's really, what's the word I'm looking for? He's really embodying a character. He's really becoming someone else, not just because of the makeup, but he's really becoming it. But also because as a fan of the comics, as a fan of Batman comics, some of the little moments, some of the little like looks on his face when he turns round and looks annoyed at something or looks amused, especially when he looks amused, there's moments where I actually have that moment as a fan where I go, that's the Penguin. That's him. That's the main version of the Penguin that I've been seeing for years in reading comics. It's him. It's not the weird, I love Danny DeVito, but it's not the weird Tim Burton Danny DeVito Penguin from Batman Returns, or the squirmy guy from the Gotham TV show. Like, there's moments in this, regardless of the name being slightly changed, where he'll just look a certain way and he'll sort of smile and you'll see some of the gold teeth and whatever, and I'm like, oh, that feels like the Penguin. And he's captivating throughout the whole thing. He's got that kind of aura where, and this is something that a lot of prestige TV wants to have, but not all of them pull it off. And it kind of does come down to one, good writing, but good performance from a charismatic actor is the big thing that really sells it. Is that feeling that you really just enjoy watching this character just go through everything, like go through the events of the episode, go through, like, almost every scene was captivating because of how he was handling the situation. And one of the things that made the recent comic book about the Penguin really good is it had this technique where comic books always have a narrator of some kind. Typically, usually it'll be the thoughts of one of the characters. Sometimes it can be a third person narrator, but usually it's the thoughts of one of the characters. But in the comic book, they never did that for Penguin himself, barring one little moment very, very near the end. It was always like from someone else's perspective. And one of the things this episode does that's really cool is that it pairs him up with this new young character who doesn't really know him and is very scared of him. So he gives us this kind of window where, like, everything the Penguin does has this air of like, oh, what's he doing here? Is it got a bit of mystique to it? And it's not got a mystique in the sense that what he's doing is mysterious or that it's that difficult to comprehend. It's more just that he's a really good window into seeing what the Penguin's doing without the Penguin ever actually stopping to explain to him, this is what I'm doing, this is what the plan is, I'm doing this over here because it's an alibi, I'm doing this over here because it's this. It kind of lets you fill in some of the blanks as you're watching, at least into a point. And I think having this fresh young character be really scared of him and be really kind of in awe of what he is, when everyone else who's above him in the food chain act like he's a piece of shit. They all treat him like they hate him, he's just a lackey, they don't respect him, they think he's whatever, like. And he's got a little bit, it's funny that I just did Ripley actually from Netflix, where he's like trying to sort of elevate himself above his station a lot in that show, because the idea that the Penguin in this has a really flashy car, he likes this purple suit that he wears, and everyone kind of like, yeah, purple car, yeah, very, very eye-grabbing, like this idea that he's got a little bit of a tackiness to him that other people are looking down on, but he wants to kind of like, you know, love what he's doing and celebrate it. And he's not always that. I mean, for most of the episode, he's wearing just like his leather coat or whatever it is, but there's definitely those moments where he's putting on appearances, where he's doing the the charade of what he's supposed to be or what he wants to be, maybe even's a better way of putting it. So I do think that the episode was very captivating by and large because of his performance, whether it's because he's in a scene where he's scared and he's kind of trying to talk his way out of something, whether it's because he's in a scene and he's the one who's scary, or he's in the scene and he's like pretending to be scared, but he's actually not. He's being very coy and manipulating someone. And then, you know, there's other characters that are good as well, but he, by and large, is the main event here, and he is very good so far, at least in this show, and I was really enjoying everything. The pacing does falter a little bit in this first episode. I definitely felt it somewhere around like the halfway point. There's maybe like a little stretch where I felt like, oh, like it doesn't feel like we're ramping up to the climax yet. We have to get to that hour mark or so. And it feels a little bit arbitrary at points, and I do kind of wish some TV shows wouldn't feel the need to get to it. But I did like the ending, though, and what it sets up for the rest of the show. I suspect that pacing issue might be something that I just generally feel about most of the episodes, just based on other shows of this type. But there's other actors in here that are worth mentioning. A rival mob boss, Salvatore Moroni, who's another character from the comics, is played by Clancy Brown, which is cool. I like Clancy Brown. It even has some DC kind of connections because if I remember correctly, he voiced Lex Luthor in the Justice League animated series, I want to say. I mean, it's been a while. Forgive me if I'm misremembering that. The other big sort of like prominent character that's introduced a good bit into this episode and has a very, very strong introduction visually to sort of tease that she's important is Cristin Milioti plays Sophia Falcone. Or Falcone. I'll probably just say Falcone if I'm honest. It's going to be hard. It feels weird every time I say Falcone. I like her a lot, actually. I know her from a really good episode of Black Mirror. She was also in season 1 of Fargo, and I'm sure I've seen her in a couple other things as well, but those are the big things that spring to mind. Oh, she was in that time loop movie with Andy Samberg, Palm Springs. But Sophia Falcone is an interesting character because she's a very prominent character in 2 series that were from the 90s or getting into the early 2000s. And that was Batman The Long Halloween and its sequel, Batman Dark Victory, which did have a lot of stuff about the Falcone family and another character who's in this as well, her brother, Alberto Falcone. It's interesting, though, having read those and knowing the character they've based this on, because they've kind of like switched around like something about her, where, I mean, this is a spoiler to say, but it's hinted that she's been in prison, or not even prison, she was specifically in Arkham, and she's just gotten out recently. But she's like brings up like a name that she was being referred to as. But what's funny, in the comic, she had also come out of prison in the story, but the name she mentioned she has in this episode, or the press called her, is something she only earned by the end of like the next story, right, the end of Dark Victory. So that was very interesting how they've kind of moved things around a little bit. She is very good in this, though, and they're really going with this idea that she might be just a complete psychopath, and there's just little moments in her performance where she'll switch to having a little smirk, or she'll have a little smirk just go away and go back to like serious big eyes and be kind of scary. It really feels like she's going to be a bit of a wild card in the show, which is kind of interesting and fun. I feel like this is the sort of role that an actor may have a lot of fun playing. But it was definitely interesting, especially when you've got her playing off of Colin Farrell's Penguin, and he's, you know, doing his thing. And I think between the two of them, like, I'm not worried about being into the acting on this show, because I was enjoying all of his scenes on his own, and I was especially enjoying his scenes with her. I think that's the other thing that I would say here, is as much as it's been the full hour-long HBO gritty crime show, it's full of F-bombs and you know, violent gunshots and things like that, is that I do appreciate it still has some of that. Well, it's gritty. It still has that pulpy, gritty feel to it, especially early on, nighttime in Gotham City. It feels a lot like the movie visually, and it's trying to emulate that. It is interesting to then see some stuff during the day though, because it feels so different. But it does feel like there's a sense of fun to it in a way that I think you wouldn't get with like a more, non-comic book version of a crime story, right? Of a criminal empire being built from the ground up kind of thing. That's what it seems like it's going to be to me. Is that this is going to be the story of Penguin taking over Gotham from like out from under all the other people who are currently in charge of the criminal underworld. I could be wrong on that, but that seems to be where it wants to go and what it wants to be. And they've already confirmed that the Penguin will be in the next movie, so I do wonder if like he's going to have a very different position in the city by the time we come back round. It is interesting though, because it does beg the question, and maybe there's a cameo later in the season. Who knows? It's possible. Anything's possible. I mean, Matt Reeves is directly involved in producing this. But I was wondering at a couple of points in this episode when stuff's going down, that if stuff keeps happening, if there keeps being shootouts and violence and stuff all season, it is kind of, at a certain point, I would be asking the question, where the hell is Batman? Because it's not like Batman... Like, I don't remember him leaving the city at the end. I remember Catwoman leaving the city at the end of the movie. So there is maybe a question here is like, okay, like it's a very grounded Batman. He can only be so many places each night. But I don't know. It's the question that occurred to me, maybe a little suspension of disbelief just to sort of roll with that so we can enjoy the story without his interference makes some sense. All right, so I think I'll say spoilers so I can just talk about everything that I want to talk about in terms of what happens in the episode. But I will say it was compelling. I like the performances. I like the overall idea of where it's going. And I think more than anything else, I really enjoyed just feeling like I was getting a fully fledged version of the Penguin. Now, I know it's not necessarily some people might prefer a goofier version of the Penguin, but I think what I like about this take on the Penguin, which it does remind me of recent versions in the comic books, is this idea of like the attitude that others have towards him, thinking he's a joke and thinking he's this fat guy who can't get anything done, and even just calling him the Penguin, that being like a motivator for him to actually win and prove that he is the boss, that he can be in charge, that he can take over the city. I do like that element to the modern interpretations of the character, and I do think that's something they're really playing with here. And it'll be interesting to see as well if by the end of the show he takes that name. Like, we know from the previous movie that it's something that some of them call him behind his back, but I do wonder if there's like a sort of like he takes it from them and says, no, this is what I am the Penguin. Like, I wonder if he actually takes that name for himself by the end of the show. Be very curious. Anyway, spoilers for episode 1. I won't necessarily talk about everything, but I think the key things to talk about here, I mentioned the opening sequence with the news reports and kind of the great shot of Penguin looking over the city. I was surprised though we didn't get the title at the end of that little moment. They actually save it for the end of the next big scene, which is Penguin goes to the Iceberg Lounge to clear out Falcone's safe and gets all the dirt that he's got in there about other like people in the organization and politicians and things like that. There's also some jewels and stuff. And that's when Alberto Falcone, Carmine Falcone's son, which I guess I've not explained who that is. I'm assuming that if anyone's watching this, you've at least seen the movie, but Carmine Falcone was the big mob boss, the head of the family that is no longer with us because of the movie. So I'll just leave it there. What was interesting about this is that by the end of the scene, Alberto Falcone dies, which I actually loved how this plays out. I love Penguin kind of like arguably inadvertently, but kind of revealing what his hopes and dreams are for who he wants to be as a mob boss, and talks about how he loved this mafia guy that was in his like neighborhood when he was a kid, and people threw a parade for him afterwards. People trusted him, people cared about him, yada yada. I feel like there was almost more to that story though, where it turned out that he was an evil prick, and we never got to the end of it though, because Alberto jumped in and started laughing because Penguin clearly wants this kind of respect for himself, and he starts mocking him. And at the end of that is when Penguin just whips out his gun and just shoots him multiple times. And it's kind of a fun, shocking moment because the entire scene, it feels like the Penguin's kissing up to him. It's like Alberto has the power, he's still with the family, he's probably taking over for his dad and running the criminal empire. And, throughout the scene, I really thought they were setting Alberto Falcone up to be a main character who's going to to be a prominent figure, be a prominent foil for Penguin, and Penguin's maybe going to manipulate him by encouraging his drug habit with the drops and things like that. Also, having read, some of the comics, specifically, I mentioned Long Halloween and Dark Victory. Alberto Falcone has a pretty big role, and there's like a big reveal about him in those comics. And that obviously ain't happening now because he's dead. So from a comic book reader kind of standpoint, this was a surprising thing at the end as well. But I loved it because it really sold this idea of Penguin having this temper, and this idea that if he's pushed and mocked and made fun of, he will retaliate. But of course, there's consequences for this because he's just killed someone important who has a lot of powerful ties. And that's why we go to the title screen on a comedy beat almost, where he says, he drops an F-bomb and says off, and then it cuts to the Penguin title. I thought that was funny, and I thought it was a really good showpiece of who this character is. This idea that he has this view in his mind of what a mob boss is, of what a criminal empire and how it should be run, how people should respect the boss, not because he's just scary, but because he actually helps them out, because he's there for them, because blah, blah, blah. And when he's mocked for it, when he's belittled and his ego is taking a hit, and it feels like he's constantly swallowing his pride. One of the things he says to Victor later on is that when he gets called in to meet the bosses, he's like, oh, yeah, every so often they do this, I have to go in, make myself look small so they feel big, and that keeps everything running and I can go back to work. I think, a lot of this is about him getting out from that. And yeah, I thought this was a great, again, just, if the opening scene of him looking out to the city was a mission statement for the show, I think this scene with Alberto Falcone was effectively just a statement about who the character is, right? Like, the first scene was his broad goal and the broad premise of what the show is. This was the scene that was like, this is who the character is and why he wants to do this, and we get a bit more of the intricacies. So I thought the two opening scenes, and again, it's kind of split over a few scenes, to be honest, because there's a jump in time when they get a drink. But this felt like it really defined, this is the character we're playing with, and this is what makes him tick. And it does set up that idea that he can be scary, that he might just pull out a gun and shoot you at any point if you piss him off. And not in the same way that the Joker is a chaotic villain. Like, the Joker might do it just because he'll think it's funny. Penguin will do it, though, because in a more predictable way, right? As much as it was kind of a surprise, it wasn't in the sense that we understand why he did it. We understand that his feelings were hurt, and he will react strongly when that happens. So he's more conventional in that sense versus a Joker, but still that level to the other characters that he's kind of unpredictable, and that you never know if this is the scene where he might not be able to contain his composure, right? And that's kind of an interesting thing to watch, and I think the performance adds a lot to it. So, I mean, the plot of the episode, I don't want to go through it scene by scene because there's just too much, but the basic gist of it is that as he's disposing this body, he's putting the body bag, he's taking it to the car. I laughed quite loud when he's like carrying it over his shoulder down these big stairs in the club, and he realizes after a couple of steps, this is really hard, I could just throw him, and he just throws him down the stairs. That was legitimately a good bit of dark humor. I really liked that. But he ends up meeting this character, Victor, who's this young guy, college-aged or whatever, maybe just out of high school. And they're stealing the hubcaps off of his car. He's got this fancy purple car, or plum to be precise, as he later tells us. But he catches them stealing his caps. He starts shooting at them. Most of them run away, but Victor doesn't quite get away. And he basically holds Victor at gunpoint and says, hey, you're helping me now. And just drags him around with him, helping him move the dead body, taking him to the various locations. And it's kind of like a night of, like, I think as soon as this stuff started, I'm like, okay, by the end of the episode, this kid's not going to be here just because he's scared of him and held at gunpoint. He's actually going to be like his loyal, like, second in command, or maybe not quite that high up the ranking, but he's going to be his protege, right? And that's, sure enough, that's what happens by the end. Like, they both come from the same neighborhood. They bond over the slush puppies. He's like, hey, you could be more than this. There's a whole scene where Victor is going to get killed. Like, Penguin's going to kill him when they're done disposing of the body. and Victor begs for it not to happen, and Penguin's like, okay, maybe you can be useful, maybe, it's like, so there's a point in the episode where he trusts him enough to leave, and like even has to, he sets him up in a plan. It's like, hey, you're going to have to do this, and we don't know what he's going to do, so it's got that fun element of, Penguin sets something up, we don't know what it is exactly, and clearly not everything goes to plan. I don't think Penguin's plan to start off the mob war that he's clearly starting to like ignite, I don't think his plan involved him getting kidnapped and like tortured and questioned by Sophia during all that. I think the plan was always to have Victor drive like the car with the brick or the cinder block on the pedal into the mansion, so that they find the dead body, and it looks like the Maroni crime family have killed Alberto to ignite this gang war or mob war, whatever you want to call it. That's fun. I like that. I like these details. It cutting back to Penguin as he smiles when this all plays out at the end of the episode, I really liked. It was interesting because I was thinking to myself, like, it feels like Sophia's already figured out that he's up to something, that he's lying about where Alberto is, and she's going to catch him out. How can this keep going? But by the end of the episode, he has convinced them that no, this was something from the other family. And then the other big detail of this, of course, is that not only does he make it look like the Maronis have killed Alberto, he even went to the Blackgate prison, right, which is the famous prison in Gotham, right? Not Arkham, that's the mental sort of prison. Well, mental hospital, but I remember in the movie it was more of just a prison. It was like Arkham State Penitentiary, but Blackgate's like the normal prison in the comic books. But he goes to see Maroni and gives him his ring back, and this is a ring that Carmine Falcone had taken from him when he won the war previously, and Alberto was wearing it. So now Alberto, his ring that he was wearing is now being worn by Salvatore Maroni walking around Blackgate. So that'll tie up nicely with his finger being cut off on the dead body that's now in the car, and it says this is payback or whatever on the on the roof of the trunk. All of that, I think is fun. I think it sets up a really strong premise going forward where everyone's going to underestimate Penguin, and he's going to come out on top because of that. With the one exception being, of course, Sophia, who even says to him in this episode, everyone underestimates you, but not me. I know you're capable of more. I think everything with her was pretty entertaining. I think her entrance, which is when Penguin goes to see like the bosses in charge, and we have Michael Kelly, I want to say is the actor's name, popping up here, which is cool. You see him in things occasionally. But yeah, he's talking to them, and then we sort of like see like a woman who's out of focus. We don't really see her properly, but we can see vaguely a woman in the background come into shot. And the music kind of tells us this is someone important. And sure enough, like we find out this is Sophia, and this is a good 30 minutes, maybe not quite that, but into the episode. And I'm like, oh yeah, Cristin Milioti. I knew she was in this. This is interesting. I want to see what she's doing. And immediately she has this very kind of like inquisitive, very very focused on Penguin and asking him questions. And then, follows them outside and insists that they go and catch up for lunch. And we have this entire scene where she's playing coy with him, but she does pretty much just blatantly ask, hey, did you see my brother? Did you see this? One of the things that Alberto was talking about earlier on is that he's got this shipment of like fancy new drugs coming in, and that it's going to revolutionize everything. And now Penguin's saying that he can have that to the bosses, but Alberto had already told his sister that he was doing that. So she finds this very suspicious. She thinks that all of a sudden Penguin's stealing his ideas, and he's also missing. That doesn't look good for Penguin. So she's got reasons to be suspect and question things, and Penguin just tries to slyly get out of it whatever way he can. Oh yeah, I'm working with him on that, and you're the surprise to me. I didn't know he brought you in on this, and he's really spinning a tale as he's trying to, it's not like Alberto's going to show up and like dispute any of this. After all, Penguin obviously does have all those gems and diamonds that he got from the safe at the Iceberg Lounge. He gives a necklace to his mother, who we meet. That's like a big scene. This was probably the part of the episode where I was feeling the pacing take a bit of a hit, was the excursion out to the suburbs to see Penguin's mother. And this idea that she's old and she's like having trouble, she's getting confused. She mentions like her kids playing that day, and obviously she means her two sons, Penguin being one of the sons, so she's confused. But at the same time, we also get her kind of like give Penguin like, you know, into trouble, like chew him out because he's acting like a pussy basically, and she pretty much says those words and says, you know, you're better than this, Oz. You're you know, you could take over this city. And you get this feeling that his Penguin's dear old mother has been this voice of like positive reinforcement. Oh wait, maybe we wouldn't call it positive. Maybe that's not the right word. But like, you know, she talks him up. She tries to like inspire him to like be who he's supposed to be and like take over everything and be the boss and not answer to anyone. All of this like, you know, character building is pretty solid. I do think that it was maybe just a little bit too much for this first episode. I could have waited till the next episode for the mother like introduction. Like I don't think that would have been too much of a stretch. There's not too much action, I would say, in this first episode, which to be honest never really bothered me. I think all of the scenes of Penguin just having to interact with the various criminal elements who he's supposed to be scared of, or him interacting with Victor, or indeed obviously Sophia being the big one that's super exciting. I think all that stuff was so compelling that I wasn't sitting going, oh, I need more violence, I need more action. The few little moments of violence you do get where he shoots someone is pretty, you know, it does feel hard, it does feel like the squibs going off feel kind of visceral and whatever. But there's a little bit of a car chase. There's a bit near the end of the episode, just before they kidnap Penguin, where they chase him in the car, and it kind of actually is a nice little payoff because Sophia notices that he's there when they're looking for him, even though he's quite far down the road, because he has the, you know, gratuitous plum car, this car that sticks out like a sore thumb. It's not discreet in any way, and his own kind of hubris of having a flashy vehicle is what gets him caught here. And he's quite smart. He kind of tricks them. I was expecting something with an umbrella here, actually, because when he drives to like a market kind of area and there's like a bunch of people with umbrellas, I thought, oh, he's going to grab an umbrella and use that to like hide in the crowd, and that's going to be like the tease of him having an umbrella, because that's a big thing with the Penguin in the comics and whatnot. He didn't do that though. Instead, he just hid in the boot, or sorry, the trunk for the Americans, and like sort of snuck back out. Unfortunately though, he does get grabbed, although the guy that grabs him gets pushed in the front of a school bus, and then Penguin just gives a little wave to the kids on the bus, which was again a little bit of dark humor. Just, it was going a long way. I think all these little bits of dark humor and the playfulness of some of the interactions was really going a long way. I think what would have really hurt this for me is if it was trying to be a very, very straight, gritty crime drama, where it's like, oh no, everything's getting taken so seriously. And I think people who like don't like a grounded Batman and are frustrated that we're not getting like a Mr. Freeze or a Clayface or a Poison Ivy and stuff like that, like I get those complaints because the movies seem to be just so scared of doing any of that stuff, right? And have been since the 90s. And to be fair, the last time they did it, it all went up in shit because they were really bad movies. But I actually don't think this is that, like, you know, I think it's very pulpy feeling. I think it's got a sense of humor, very dark humor at times, but I do think there's a playfulness to how the characters interact. I don't think that Cristin Milioti's character, Sophia Falcone, comes off as a character that would work in a more like serious drama. She works in this because everything's a little bit heightened because we're in a comic book world. So even though we don't have like meta-humans and monsters and superpowers and stuff like that seemingly going around, it still has kind of a playful vibe to it, to me, that I think is what's making it work for me. Beyond just the compelling performances, I think that sense of fun that's there, regardless of how like gritty it otherwise feels, gives it a personality that I think is really making it work, at least so far in episode 1. I mean, who knows what the pacing of this thing is going to be like over the 8 episodes, or maybe 10 if it's 10, but I think it's 8. I don't... you know, I think that's its biggest, other than Colin Farrell's performance. I think its personality with its sense of humor and this sense of playfulness is by far its biggest asset, other than Farrell himself. I can't say I'm pleasantly surprised per se, because I did see like the Rotten Tomatoes score like a few days before it came out, like was quite good. But you know, I still kind of thought I might not be into it. I still thought that I might feel a bit weird about it, or it's kind of, you know, is it just this kind of weird like need for content? Oh, we'll have something tying into the movie. Does it feel like it's actually worthwhile? But I think the smartest thing this does in terms of its concept, right? Because obviously, again, biggest assets are Colin Farrell, and then like the sense of humor it has, and then Cristin Milioti as well, right underneath those two things. I would say that the biggest sort of right choice they made is that they immediately made this clear that this is indeed Penguin's story. Like it feels like it's his arc, it's his mission. It's going to explore and prod it why he wants to be this and why he wants to achieve this. What the other characters are doing to him that are making him kind of tick and have that fire in his belly to actually change things. I think that's ultimately what's going to make this feel like it's a worthwhile thing on its own and not just a bit of add-on content to the last Batman movie. No, good first episode. Like I say, it has maybe a bit of a pacing stumble in the sort of middle to sort of later third, but ending solid. And I thought the first like 20-25 minutes were just really compelling and all just flowed on one scene from the other very, very well. Not that it can keep that up, but I liked that it wasn't spread out over a ton of time. It was very much like, you know, like the first like half of the episode is basically all just one night into the next morning, and then there's, you know, the next day or two is the rest of the episode. I appreciated that. So no, that's my my thoughts on the first Penguin episode. I was kind of all over the place there. I'm curious to see where we go next. I suppose it's worth mentioning the character of Victor, as far as I know, is not a character from the comic books. This is a new character here, so they can do anything they want with him. Will he be alive or dead at the end of this season? I do not know, but we'll see. If he is alive, it'd be interesting to see him have a small part in the next movie. That'd be kind of cool. And we'll see if we get to actually witness why Sophia has been referred to as the Hangman, which again is a moniker she does get in the comics in Dark Victory, but it's kind of after she's already out of prison and does some other stuff. So probably not that hard to imagine what she's doing to people that gets the nickname the Hangman, but I'll let you fill in the blank yourself. That's the Penguin, episode 1. It's pretty good. I am optimistic about the rest of the show. So thank you very much for joining me. You can support the content and everything, all the reviews, all the movie podcasts over MailFuzz Movies by going over to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and get some bonuses over there. If you'd rather do YouTube membership, that also helps out a bunch. Any and all support is greatly appreciated and is what helps keep all of this stuff keep coming. I wouldn't be able to do it without the support. So thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?